to one of my favorite author, Catherine May's podcast episodes recently. She's the author of Wintering and Enchantment, and I just love her. And she was talking about the power of incorporating more enchantment, wonder, and magic into our everyday lives. And she said that one of the places that can start is by simply beginning to appreciate and delight in these small synchronicities that follow us around in everyday life. And I am really appreciating one of those small synchronicities as I record the intro for this episode several weeks ahead of time, because today here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's the summer solstice. And for those of you who are not familiar with the astrological significance of the summer solstice, today represents a day for initiation and new beginnings. It's a day that should be utilized to nourish our true inner selves and invite in more moments of stillness, self-reflection, and opportunities to become fully present with where and with who you are. And that just feels so relevant to today's episode and our conversation with our delightful guest today, because we're going to be talking about the power of everyday magic and the power of manifesting as ambitious empaths. And it hits me like, gosh, just a lead balloon that as highly sensitive people and empaths, we are naturally intuitive. We're highly creative. We're gifted dreamers. And perhaps more so than others, like we have so much to gain from allowing ourselves to dream, to engage in more wonder and everyday magic and manifesting in our lives. And it's incredibly scary and confronting for so many of us because it is an incredible and worthy and worthwhile act of vulnerability for you as an intuitive empath to lean into the courageous and vulnerable act of dreaming. And I am this is deeply resonant for me, and I share on today's episode a story in my own life, a recent story in my own life of one dream that was perhaps more important to me than any other, and was one that I withheld allowing myself to hold or to share because of how deeply important it was for me, of how deeply I wanted it. And if you've been here a while, you too are likely a natural dreamer at heart. And being willing to dream is a super vulnerable practice at best. So I commend you for leaning in. It also takes so much courage and bravery to be willing to then share your most ardently held dreams, let alone open your heart big enough to allow yourself the full range of having those dreams in the first place. And for so many of us, while we were natural dreamers and creators in childhood, we also had extremely big hearts and high sensitivity. We were extra receptive and likely still are to our caregivers and partners' opinions, judgments, and critiques of those dreams, and often ethereal and sensitive responses to the world around us. Our natural tendencies to care for and please those around us have often resulted in disconnecting from those creative parts of ourselves. We're prone to abandoning ourselves and our dreams in lieu of caretaking and people pleasing, plus having a default orientation towards achievement, seeking external validation, and doing what we were told was good or right. Naturally, those voices were often louder and more assertive and more commanding than our own. All of these responses were such a natural reaction to protect our sensitive hearts and extremely caring natures, but they further disconnected us from our inner knowing, our creative ideas, and our dreams. It is so important to share this first in order to normalize that it can be hard to reconnect with your dreams when you disconnected from them a long time ago in order to maintain a sense of safety and self-protection. But so much of our growth as highly sensitive people and intuitive empaths is to do that courageous work of opening your heart, trusting yourself and your intuition, reconnecting with your creative self, and allowing yourself to dream again. So I'm delighted to dig into today's podcast episode with Catherine Andrews, where we talk so much about the power of everyday magic, the power of incorporating more manifesting into everyday life, into your habits and practices and rituals. Catherine is a writer and life coach whose expertise is in helping people discover who they really are, what they really want, and then take the actionable, practical steps to start making it all happen. She is an expert in intentional living, and she is a huge commitment for helping her clients mindfully and authentically take actions to build a life that reflects all of your potential and capabilities. We have such a delicious conversation about both of our definitions of manifestation and what it means to each of us. We talk about the difference between ego-based versus soul-aligned manifestations and desires. Catherine shares her inspiring story of manifesting her relationship, her dream home, and her personal favorite manifestation practices. There's so many synchronicities between her story and mine that are just kind of wild. We talk about how to be vulnerable in your desires, how to incorporate a practice of everyday magic into your work, and how to open your heart to genuine love. It is such a delightful, rich, deep, and vulnerable conversation. I hope you enjoy it, and let's jump in. Hello and welcome to the Prosperous Empath Podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Catherine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to connect and to talk today.
It's so fun. Two Catherines who are both used to be based in DC, who are coaches for highly sensitive. I actually don't know if who your audience is. We can hear more about that in a moment, but for highly sensitive folks.
I know, so many similarities.
So I'd love to invite you to share your pronouns and share a little bit with my audience about who you are.
Yes. Well, I'm Catherine Andrews. My pronouns are she, her, and I live about 75 minutes west of Washington, D.C., just right on the edge of Western Virginia, almost into West Virginia. And like you mentioned, I'm a life coach for highly sensitive people, primarily women, but anybody who wants to come and learn from me, I welcome. And I teach on almost everything and coach on almost everything. I am a life coach for people who are interested in overcoming fear, people-pleasing, perfectionism. I teach and coach on spirituality and magic, which I know we might talk about a little bit today. I do some business coaching here and there. And yeah, just another human trying to navigate this imperfect but beautiful life, doing the best I can, sharing my wisdom along the way.
I would love, one thing I've appreciated, we've known each other. I know we've talked about this, but I think we connected when you were just starting your coaching journey. That's correct, right?
We knew each other a little bit. I think we had some friends in common in Washington, D.C. And, it's one of those things where, like you said, there's two Catherines with the C. You started your coaching and your business well before I did. So I looked up to you across the pages of Instagram as a role model for me, because I was in the corporate world for almost 20 years and terrified to make that leap. And, you were in the government in Washington, D.C. I was in sort of a corporate communications role for many years in Washington, D.C., and had a lot of fear about becoming an entrepreneur. I had no models for entrepreneurship. I had, no experience in starting a business. I had been an English and journalism major, and the idea of finances and running my own business is very scary to me. But I saw you, who claimed, yourself as a highly sensitive person, an empath, starting a business, being successful at it. And I was like, okay, this is the expander that I need. So I had known about you a little bit in DC, but I don't think we really connected more one-on-one until recently.
Yeah. Well, you've showed up in my feed maybe because we have similar markets. And I think something I've appreciated, even just watching your journey from the sidelines, is how much you've manifested what you wanted. Like, you've really declared and fulfilled on so much of what you set out to do, from attracting a romantic partner into your life. Like, I remember seeing about that several years ago, to moving outside of the city, to just so many aspects of it. So I guess I would love to hear, maybe to start there, like what your relationship to manifesting and maybe we'll start with manifesting, and then we can weave into magic, because I know that's something that you really love incorporating into business. And I'm so curious to hear more.
Yes, and I hope it's so of service to your audience, the prosperous empaths out there, because I think it's such a beautiful way of being in our business, to use magical tools and co-create with the universe. It's something that comes very naturally to us. But for me, manifestation is something I didn't even know existed until 3 or 4 years ago. And what's funny is I just wasn't that spiritual of a person until about 4 years ago or so. And as can often happen with people, you're going through some sort of personal awakening in life. I was unfulfilled in my corporate career. I was struggling in dating, and, had been in years of therapy, but it all kind of really came to a head in my late 30s. And I had started doing more practices of journaling. I picked up a tarot deck for fun. And before I knew it, I was like, I think I'm a spiritual person. I think I'm having a spiritual awakening. Is that a thing? And then sort of found the practice of manifestation, which over the past few years, for me, and I think manifestation, if people decide to practice it, believe in it, it's such a unique and individual practice. And for me, how I describe it is simply co-creation with the universe, for my soul's highest evolvement. So manifestation for me, I think when we learn about manifestation or start to see about it on social media, we think of it as a very material thing. So I'm going to go manifest that Ferrari or that trip to Spain. And that's super fun and definitely can be a part of it. But for me, manifestation has really been powerful when I think about it as a co-creative process with whatever the energies are around me that want me to step into the path of my soul. So I think my business was a manifestation for sure. I think my romantic partner, totally, absolutely feel like it manifested the heck out of that. And the house that I now live in, which is a 250-year-old log cabin in the middle of nowhere, Virginia. And these things were all things that I knew my deepest soul's purpose and heart I really wanted, but logically didn't feel like I deserved them or that they would make sense for me on the path I was on. But as I stepped more and more into the spiritual awakening, into discovering my magical abilities, which we all have, and deciding that there were benevolent forces in the universe that wanted me to move towards certain goals and desires, I started to more consciously manifest, I guess we would call it. But I'd love to hear, what do you think? Do you have a manifestation practice, or how do you define it?
Yeah. I mean, I love the idea of like relating to it as a co-creative practice. I think I do similarly, but I think I really relate to it as a spiritual practice, like a willingness to allow my desires to lead, a willingness to speak what I desire into existence. I can't remember if I recommended this book on your podcast when we chatted a couple weeks ago, but one of the books we read in my mastermind most regularly is called Worthy. It's I can't remember the subtitle. I think it's Boost Your Self-Worth to Grow Your Net Worth by Nancy Levin, who she used to be the events producer at Hay House, and she became a coach. So she has lots of coaching practices in her book. It's a very practice-heavy book. But one of the practices in her book it's called the 50 Desires List. And this is a manifestation practice that I use now consistently. So I think it's worth exploring. But she asks you to write down 50 desires that you have, right? They can be small, they can be materialistic, non-materialistic, experiential, emotional. They're really like no cap. She limits that you can only desire 10 things for other people.
The rest have to be in there.
The rest have to be for you. And then she also breaks it up into writing the first 25, and then she separates the second 25. And I love how she explains this exercise, because for most of us, it is highly, radically uncomfortable to write down 50 things that you desire.
Mm-hmm.
And in my very first cohort of my mastermind, we used to do evening book clubs where we talk about the books. So it was like separate from our group calls, and we'd bring a glass of wine. We don't do it in the evenings anymore. But during that first book club call where we read that book, we all did our desires lists together. And we spent half the call doing this exercise together in a group. And it was deeply spiritual and sacred to take this time with, 8 women all at once and share and write down these 50 desires we had. And I pulled out my list last week. I was looking for a quote from another book that I love, and I found my 50 desires list from that very first cohort, and I counted up how many I had fulfilled on, and I fulfilled on 33.
Oh my God.
50.
Amazing.
And I think that that's what manifestation is. Like, it's being willing to trust the universe with what you want.
Yes.
And to lean into the vulnerability of allowing yourself to feel into the experience of having it, and then surrendering the timeline,
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. And I love that you named it as such too, because I think, highly sensitive people and empaths, we can have a complicated relationship with the idea of manifesting, because it can sound selfish or self-centered or too material. But what I hear you saying, and what I truly believe too, it's manifestation is simply following like the compass of your heart's desires and allowing it to unfold through life, and being bold enough to claim it. But we have our desires for a reason. Your vision of whatever you wrote on that list, however long ago it was, if I had written a list at the same time, maybe there'd been a couple, we're both life coaches, entrepreneurs. There may have been some overlap, but it would have been totally different. And that's because we're unique individuals who have our desires for a reason. And it's not a mistake. It's just not a mistake to want the things that we want. Where I do find it can be tricky for empaths and HSPs to do manifestation is deconditioning from like ego manifestations versus like soul purpose manifestations. And ego manifestations can be like, oh, I want to make, I need to make 6 figures, or I want this promotion, or I want this car. Those can be somebody's soul manifestations, but I find the ego ones are more often related to status or familial conditioning or what you think you should want. And the soul manifestations are the things you kind of daydream about and tell yourself, well, it's not really practical to want those things. Like, I did a whole podcast episode on manifesting this house, and it was just It was just like the craziest dream. Like I wanted an old house full of character in a small village, but that was still walkable to coffee shops. And I just was like, well, this just doesn't really exist, so I'm not going to really let myself think about it. Boom. September of 2022, I guess, we found this place that had all of those criteria. And that was really a huge teacher for me in my manifestation practice, was that your desires don't have to be logical. And they don't have to be realistic. And you're right that there is a lot of surrender involved in the process. For example, I was thinking about a house like this for over 3 years. So it was not by any means like a super fast manifestation. But there was divine timing in it. And it really gave me the lesson that like, I get to want the things that I want. Not only is this house old, full of character, in nature, in a village of 100 people. There are 2 coffee shops within walking distance. It has a clawfoot tub, which was like a big thing for me. It has a yard for space for a garden. It's on a creek, a water feature. And I was like, oh, this is how it works. I give myself permission to desire exactly what I want. And take the action steps towards it, and then let the timeline unfold and do the surrender part, which sucks, but definitely a big part of the manifestation process is the surrender.
I mean, I love what you said, like we get to want what we want. And I think that is such a radical practice for so many of us, because we judge ourselves for wanting what we want, or we think we don't deserve it, or we think we're not worthy of it, or we think we haven't earned it, which is, I think so much of what this podcast is about for me. It's really about giving ourselves permission to thrive and prosper in all the different ways. And, wanting what we want is a practice. I think it's something that we gain facility with as we allow ourselves to lean into it. And so, I love how you distinguish ego-based manifestations versus soul-aligned manifestations. Like, something I'm always encouraging clients is just start wherever you can. If you start with the egoic manifestations, great, start there, but allow it to be a place that you linger and gain facility with, and gain access to, and gain more joy with. I think, for me, like, I love, well, I'd love to link in the show notes to your episode on manifesting your home, because I'm sure my audience would love that. But, for me, like, I just moved up to Boston last year, and I can safely say that moving home to Massachusetts is something that I never allowed myself to manifest, because I didn't think it was possible. My husband is a Midwesterner at heart, and as a person of color, quite honestly, he doesn't feel super welcome in Boston. Boston is historically a very white part of the country. And it's something that I felt too vulnerable to allow myself to dream or manifest. But what I did manifest was living near the ocean. That's something I gave myself access to manifest. And it's just funny, like we all do that. Like, we allow ourselves to have a certain percentage of wanting what we want. And I think we all, in different ways, like, put a cap on what we allow ourselves to dream or manifest or envision. And I think that, hearing other people's manifestation experiences or stories give us permission to lean into it more.
Can I tell you like a tiny magic thing that happened in the manifestation of this house? Because I so relate to what you're saying. But this is why I think magic is so important to bring into your life, whether you're a spiritual person or not, just synchronicities and allowing delight. But the funny thing was, we came to look at this house, and I'd never heard of this town. And it was just still like, I was like, well, let's go look at it. Like, and I was moving with my boyfriend, and he had found the listing. And I was like, yeah, we would never move out there, but why not go look at it? Sounds like a fun Saturday afternoon. And we're in the house, and in my head, I'm like ticking off. I'm like, it's the exact square footage. It's the exact, like, it's 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. Oh my God, there's a clawfoot tub. Oh my God, there's a creek. But at the end of the visit, I was still like, oh, well, for somebody else, but not for me. There was still that like not permission giving or thinking this is something I deserve or I could do. And we are finishing kind of the tour out on the back deck and we're talking to the realtor. And all of a sudden, my boyfriend grabs me by the shoulders and spins me around and has me look out at the creek. And he goes, look. And there is a great blue heron majestically flying down the creek right in front of our faces. And the thing is, the great blue heron is like mine and my boyfriend's sign. We're obsessed. And actually, that's a print of a great blue heron behind me if anybody sees this on video. And I was just like, oh crap, this is happening. Like, but it took that sign from the universe, because I relate very much to nature and I'm always looking to nature almost as a divination deck. It took that sign from the universe to allow me to see the possibility that I could put an offer in on this house. Cause it just hadn't, my belief, my ability, my deservingness, my mindset hadn't snapped into the possibility of that, even though it was literally everything I wanted on my list. And yes, I did buy this house because I saw a great blue heron. And my boyfriend is like, okay, realtors are going to think that's the strangest thing ever. But, that's part of magic and that's part of manifestation, is also, allowing yourselves these synchronicities and these signs that point to, yes, this is for you. Yes, you can have this.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I love that you shared that example, because we do. It's like we put a cap on our possibility. We put a cap on how much we allow ourselves to dream, how much we allow ourselves to, even when it can be right in front of us, right? Like I love that it took seeing the blue heron for you to trust what you wanted, you could have, and you deserve to have. And like, okay, I want to just add my like additional version of that. So last spring, we were living in Maryland still, and my husband had applied for grad schools, and he applied to Harvard, and I was the one. So I was the one who was like, don't apply to Harvard. Like, like maybe you don't need another degree. Like, what if it, I don't want you to get disappointed, right? Harvard is in Massachusetts. Like Harvard is an hour from my childhood home. And like, here I am trying to put a cap on my husband or then fiance's like opportunities. And I think at the core of it, I was just scared that he wouldn't get in, and then I'd get my dreams crushed, And even the whole application process, like I didn't allow myself maybe like an iota of hope or like excitement about that possibility, because I really just didn't want to be crushed. And I remember when he got the news that he got accepted, he thought that I was on a call in my office, and we share walls. And I heard him calling my parents to tell them that he had gotten in, and our wall was like very thin. So I heard him, and I screamed like at the top of my lungs, because it felt like this dream that I'd wanted, probably for almost the whole decade I lived in DC, was coming true. And I just like collapsed into tears because I think that, I didn't allow myself to want what I wanted because it felt too perfect to be possible.
Yeah. I'm like tearing up listening to you, because I can feel the emotion and the vulnerability that is involved in that. And I think it's so hard for empaths and HSPs to be vulnerable in our desires. And that is, it's totally scary. I get it. Like we are so sensitive and we feel so deeply, and we've been hurt before, and then we really can carry those wounds with us. And so then I think sometimes we turn into very like practical people, and we're like, well, let's not, get our hopes up. Let's make the practical decision, because we might've been just such sensitive dreamers as kids who did want those big things. And when you have those experiences where you get your desires quashed, it can be so painful. But I think it's such a beautiful growth opportunity to allow yourself to be vulnerable, because I do believe with manifestation, it's always this or something better. And along the course of a life, when you're manifesting specific things, you will get disappointed, but there's always something better coming. And it's either, what's the saying? It's like not not right now or not this, but something better. And yeah, allowing yourself to lean into that vulnerability, and which is why stating your desires out loud, even if it's just to yourself in your journal, is the very first step in whether you call it intentional living, manifesting, goal setting, being bold enough to whisper, that secret desire to yourself and just put it down on paper, right? Which is scary for most of us, but that's where I think all desires start, is just that quiet admitting to yourself. And it's a very vulnerable act, but it's a very beautiful and powerful one.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. As you were saying that, I'm thinking about like all the manifestations or dreams that I have kind of hidden in different parts of my apartment, like pages stuffed into little books that I want to remember, or my vision board, or, I have like a little dream jar that I have my like current top 3 biggest dreams inside of.
I love that.
So I'd love to hear yours. Like, what are your favorite manifestation practices?
Well, I don't know that I have a very strict practice, but I think non-negotiable for me is stream of consciousness journaling, because I actually find what can block empaths and HSPs and a lot of humans generally from manifesting is actually just knowing what we want, like on this soul level. So it's necessary to do that self-exploration and spend that alone time with yourself, whether it's in meditation or journaling, because then that's where you start to get the spark. Say you are a person, like you and I have just talked about these moves. You wanted to move to Massachusetts. I wanted to move to a cottage in the woods, but we didn't know that for a while, that those desires were on our heart, because we were thinking practically or egoically or, quote unquote, realistically. But journaling is where I allow myself to dream a little bit. So just general journaling, I practice the morning pages journaling practice as taught by Julia Cameron in The Artist's Way, classic, best book in the world as far as I'm concerned. And that's just 3 pages of journaling, stream of consciousness journaling. So it may start out like, I'm sleepy, I didn't make my coffee strong enough this morning, or whatever. And then you kind of just see where your thoughts lead you for those 3 pages, and you try to do it first thing in the morning. And I would say other techniques are, I have a writing background. My degrees are in English and journalism. And so writing has always been a very powerful manifestation tool for me. And I think one thing I do like to do is every year, I will so in December 2022, I wrote a letter as if I was writing it back to my past self from December 2023. And it was like, hey, Catherine, in December 2022, wow, it's Catherine from a year later, and you will not believe the year we had. And I kind of just let myself dream on that page, and I live into the feeling as much as possible. Things I'm talking about this year were business goals that I had. I started a membership, and so I talked about that in the letter, and I just launched that. I want to go to Italy, so I talked about that too. I talked about, small things like starting a container garden at the home or running a 5K, and bigger things like big goals and dreams that I have for travel and business too. So it's that kind of future self journaling can be really powerful. And then I use feng shui, home energy for manifesting a lot. You can make your home into a vision board, and that might be a whole other episode to talk specifically about how highly sensitive people can use home energy and the principles of feng shui. Although for entrepreneurs, I definitely have some tips. So if you want to jump into that at any point, we can do that. But there are certain energies in your home that you can take advantage of, and certain ways you can adjust your home. Our home is our incubator for ourselves. And if you're intentional about the way you create your home, decorate your home, envision your home, that can be a really powerful manifesting tool. Like an example I can use is that somebody who dreams of being an entrepreneur, maybe they have, a tiny little storage room that could technically be converted into an office or a working space of some sort, but they're like, well, my business isn't real yet, so I'll turn that into a workspace when my business is real. And my manifestation advice would be like, turn that space into the working space right now before your business is here, because it signals in so many levels to the universe, to your subconscious, that you're taking your business seriously. And so that's an example of how you can use your home kind of as a manifestation tool. But those are just some off the top of my head that I really enjoy using. And mostly I would just say like fun. To me, manifestation magic, it's just like when you let in the delight, and it's such a creative practice and I know HSPs and empaths are the most creative people. When you kind of just tune into like what would be like hilarious and fun to do, then you can really get going with a lot of it too. So just discovering your own flavors of these things.
I mean, I'm appreciating as you and I are talking about this, like our faces are just totally lit up, like It is such a fun topic to talk about. And I think that it's intended to be a fun practice, because I think when we get outside of our logical brain and we allow ourselves to connect with the emotionality of our manifestations, we gain more facility, we gain more access to our being, to our desires, to our essential self. And I want to add a couple, because so let's see. So you and I both manifested our partner.
Yes.
I also manifested my partner. I also love the artist state from Julia Cameron's work, but I adapted it when I was trying to manifest love by taking myself on a weekly self-love date as a way to practice treating myself the way I wanted to be treated in a relationship. So I used to take myself out on weekly dates. That was a really powerful practice for me, like just learning how I wanted to be treated and then taking the first step and treating myself in that way, whether it was taking myself to the botanical gardens. I mean, the orchid room at the National Botanical Gardens is my favorite room in all of DC. Or there's some exhibits in the West Gallery and the National Gallery of Art that I just absolutely love. So that was a really powerful practice for me when I just started out. And then, have you heard of the book Calling in the One by Catherine?
Yes, that is what I used.
Ditto. Me too.
It really freaking works. Anybody listening out there, like watch out. Because if you do that book, I absolutely, and I don't even think I finished the book, to be honest, but like, I remember finding an old journal. I was like a year into dating my partner and I found a journal, and one of the practices was like, list all the ways your relationship will make you feel, or something like that. And I was like, check. That book is great though.
Wow. There's a practice. So that book, for our listeners, it's 6 weeks of daily practices to call in your partner. And so there's a practice from every day and then an exercise attached to every practice. So a couple of those practices were particularly potent for me. So one is to prepare your home for your partner coming into it. So I lived on Capitol Hill at that point in my life, and I bought a second nightstand so I could have a nightstand on both sides of my very tiny studio in Capitol Hill. And I moved all of my clothes to half of the closet so that there was space in my tiny closet for a partner. And I emptied everything from a drawer in one of my dresser, my only dresser, so that I literally was creating space for my partner to take. That was super powerful for me. Another exercise from that book is to write a journal entry to your future partner as if you've already met him. And I saved this. It's in another one of my books in my bookcase. But I remember writing like, dear love of my life, like I can feel us getting closer, coming together. And I don't know when we're going to meet or when we're going to start dating, but I am excited and waiting for you and ready. And that was like 3 months before I started dating my now husband. And, and I really felt it. Like when I wrote that journal entry to him, like I could feel that energetic shift because, love was already right in front of me. Like I had already been friends with this dude for 4 years. It was just how I was not allowing myself to see what was right in front of me,
So funny because I was friends with my boyfriend for 3 years before we started dating. So we just add some more similarities to our list. But that book is literal magic. I mean, that's the thing about me. First off, the home stuff, that's classic feng shui. Two, And feng shui is just, and for anybody who hasn't heard of it, is just an ancient Chinese practice from about 4,000 years ago about working with energies seen and unseen to get desired outcomes and to live more in harmony with life. But the classic example is often just what you said, Kat, which is 2 nightstands, making sure, your bed and your bedroom is welcoming, making sure there's literal space. Space clearing is magic. I mean, when you create space or create a corner of your home, say you wanted to cook more and you bought some new pans because that's something you wanted to do to nourish yourself. Those sorts of things are really, truly powerful. And that book is an excellent book because it does allow you to tap in again to the vulnerability, I think. I mean, when I'm reflecting back on our conversation so far, I think underlying a lot of what we're talking about is the vulnerability inherent in manifestation, because it's about these unapologetic desires that we might be scared to name. Mm-hmm. But when you claimed that you wanted love, I mean, believe me, when I bought that book, I was like, am I going to do this book? Like, can't I just find somebody on Tinder and like make this happen? And I felt cheesy and silly. But now I know, looking back, anytime I feel cheesy or silly, it's just a sign that I'm actually stepping into vulnerability because I've had some cynical defenses around my desires. But, and yeah, you tap into the practices in that book, and claim what you want and feel into it via journaling or visualization. Those are powerful and magical shifts. I absolutely agree. That's wonderful to hear.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're using this word vulnerability, and I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think another word that comes to mind is like the idea of being open-hearted versus defended. Like, I think manifestation is such an open-hearted practice. It requires allowing others to see into us and allowing ourselves to share more parts of us, to connect with more parts of our core wants and preferences and desires and urges and pleasures. And, for so many of us, like, I think we learned to be defended. We learned to be guarded against our dreams.
Yes. And out of necessity and safety. I mean, when you're
absolutely
a kid who's an empath, my God, your heart is so tender. I was the most sensitive, tenderhearted, loving little girl. And then, you experience wounds as you grow up, whether they happen via, even stuff that doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Like, I had a pretty good childhood, but I had some bullying in elementary school. I had some disappointments in high school and college. And, you kind of learn to close that heart center down. But that actually reminds me, I do think if you identify as an empath or an HSP, your heart center is your number one manifesting tool. And so whatever you can do to open your heart again, to be vulnerable, there's a mix of heart opening tactics. We were just, before we started recording, talking about yoga. There's even yoga postures that are meant to open the chest and the heart chakra. There's inner child healing, that can be very healing for the heart center. There's feeling into the body. I really think of our body as our manifestation magnet in a lot of ways too. And feeling that warm glow in your heart when you think about the things that you're visualizing, you're dreaming about. Your heart center is so powerful. I mean, that's whenever I'm coaching or working with empaths and HSPs, we are very strong up here. I know we both tend to work with high achievers, so very strong intellectually. We can be pretty smart, pretty practical, pretty logical. And that's great. That's a great asset. But I want folks to start thinking about the mind as the executor of the heart's desires. The mind isn't meant to tap us into our soul's desires. It's meant to help us take the steps to get towards what our heart actually wants. So whatever you can do to connect back into your heart, whether it's yoga or dancing or journaling or inner child healing or being in nature, whatever there is, that's where your pure and potent manifestation powers will come from.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such an incredibly important reminder for our listeners to really take with them from this episode, is that for those of us who identify as empaths and HSPs, which is likely you if you're listening, we are incredibly heart-centered, right? In childhood, we were likely the most loving ones in the room. And we learned to guard our hearts and to close them and protect them, to keep ourselves safe. And there's some real unlearning we have to do in order to be willing to open our hearts again, to trust our hearts to lead and to speak for us. And I think that that's some of the most important work that we can do in order to really gain facility to our manifesting muscles. You and I were talking about Kundalini before we started recording, and that's one of the reasons I love Kundalini, because it incorporates so many different elements of healing into the practice. For many of us, we think of yoga as just the asanas, just the physical postures, but Kundalini encompasses meditation, chanting, breath work, mantras, the asanas, and breath work in particular, I think is a really potent practice for empaths and HSPs to reconnect with, because we can gain access to so many trapped emotions through doing breath work and through allowing ourselves to really reconnect with our voice. I think one of the ways I think we become disconnected from our heart is by that giver mentality, like that giver archetype, and always focusing on the other person and always being of service, which is wonderful, but not when it's at the expense of ourselves and our care and our preferences. So I think, I just add breath work and Kundalini, shout out to Kundalini, to the list. But yeah, I love this conversation. And I really appreciate just our shared journeys and how allowing ourselves to manifest, to being willing to open our hearts and trust our desires has led us down such aligned paths for each of us. So I'm mindful of the time, and I want to be sure we touch on magic. So,
oh yes,
I'd love to hear, how do you incorporate magic into your work, and what does it even mean to you? I mean, I'm just appreciating, after we connected last, you pulled a card for me and you sent me the significance of the card, and I was like, this is so cool. No one's ever done this for me in a entrepreneurial capacity.
Well, so I love that. And I definitely have my tarot deck right here. So if we want to pull another card at the end of the episode for your listeners, I would be more than happy to do that. But for me, magic and manifestation, I mean, to me, it's all inextricably linked. There's not necessarily like a pillar over here that's manifestation, a pillar over here that's tarot, a pillar over here that's magic. That said, for me, and I think everybody should reflect on, if they believe in magic, their own individual definitions, because again, it'll be super unique and filtered through your own soul and perspective and lived experience. But for me, I really just see magic as working with the energies that are already inherent and available in the universe towards a desired outcome. I think of again, I'm an English major, so when I talk about physics, I don't really know what I'm talking about. But we all understand that there are certain laws that govern material matter in this universe. So there's gravity, or an object in motion stays in motion, or whatever, But I find magic is the study and application of the laws that apply to energy, to intent, to belief, to desire, to emotions. And so when I'm talking about okay, I'm going to go do some magic, for me, it's usually about naming an intent, an outcome that I would like, keeping in mind that I hope it's for the highest good of everybody involved, and then making shifts in my observable physical material life. Ways that I practice magic are, again, I've mentioned feng shui before. So there's different, if anybody ever Googles witches or witchcraft, there's tons of different kinds of witches. And I discovered a couple of years ago the term cottage witch, which is somebody who creates magic with her home. And so that can look like cooking in your home, or creating an altar in your home, or doing intentional and magic cleaning in your home. Imagine creating a simmer pot of basil and oranges, and then using that to wipe down your kitchen to bring in abundance, or sweeping your front door and calling in new opportunities, or feeding the birds around your property so that you're increasing the chi, the life force energy around your home property. So sometimes I'm doing magic with my home using the principles of feng shui. Sometimes I'm doing magic in ritual, lighting a candle every morning and visualizing a desire that I have or an outcome. I love using the new moon for manifesting and for magic and community. I love nature-based magic rituals. And sometimes a nature-based magic ritual is just simply walking along a path and delighting in the honeysuckle bush that has such a fragrance, and giving gratitude for that. Sometimes magic for me is pulling tarot cards and asking, tarot. When I'm using tarot, I think of it like a telephone to the universe, and the universe is being like, have you considered these angles? So sometimes my magic practice is pulling tarot cards or oracle cards and seeing, what perspectives do I need to consider in a decision? What energies are at play for me? So it's sort of this ever evolving, ever changing practice. I mean, overall for me, it is about using, again, these energies inherent in the universe, and co-creating with them. Again, it kind of comes back to the co-creation for me. I hope that makes a little bit of sense.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think a couple aspects of what you shared that I appreciate is that when we allow like the magical realm into what we're creating, what we're bringing to life, what we're manifesting, declaring, like to some degree, we're allowing a third dimension to come into play. Like we're allowing ourselves to not solely control the outcome or to solely be responsible for getting us where we want to be. And I think that is super important. Like, we both work with high achievers. And I think a typical trait of high achievers is that we are typically very driven and ambitious, but also controlling.
Yes.
And when we try to control the outcome, we're typically basing what we want on past experience, right? We can only control something that we know it's how it's going to look, whether we've seen it or experienced it before, or someone else we know has achieved it. Like we can only control what we can perceive. And when we allow magic or manifesting, or even surrendering our dreams to a higher power, or having our manifesting be a spiritual practice, like we actually allow ourselves to get outside of our logical brain. We allow ourselves to be in a future-based conversation rather than a past-based one. And we allow ourselves to co-conspire with the universe, or the magical realm, or higher power, or God, or nature. For me, like I've always found God in nature. So whatever that looks like for you, I think that however we as ambitious empaths can get outside of our logical mind and connect with our heart centers in order to trust and co-create, I think that is a much more aligned and powerful way to create beyond what we know, to create outside of our comfort zone, to co-conspire and co-create with the universe, and to elevate, to grow, to evolve.
Yeah. And I find so anybody who's like newer to magic or manifestation, I know when I found out and heard about them, I'm like, great tools to get exactly what I want. So I was manifesting and using magic from at first when I first started playing around it from a very controlling perspective, a very controlling mindset. And then I would be disappointed when I would try out a magic spell or manifest something and it didn't come to fruition or looked completely different than I thought that it quote unquote should look. And now I know that it's, I used to be like, ugh, I'm not in control. This is so horrible. And now I'm like, I'm not in control. This is wonderful. That knowing that there's this co-creative partner in the driver's seat, or sometimes you're in the driver's seat, they're in the driver's seat, you're doing this journey together. But that is taking care of so many of the details behind the scenes for you. And when you're playing around with magic or manifestation, always leaving space for something you can't expect to come into. And so making sure that, I can't say don't be controlling when you practice magic or manifestation, because I think a lot of us go through that phase where we decide to consciously manifest or consciously do magic with a specific goal in mind. And I think you'll learn your lessons along the way that you're meant to. But if you can just leave space, that magic and manifesting is like a play date with the universe, and you're kind of just daydreaming out loud with each other with what you want. And then doing like rituals and connection and self-care to support in that unfolding. That's how I practice it now. I rarely sit down and manifest. I actually almost never, there's things I want, there's goals I want, but I don't say like, okay, in 2023, I have to accomplish these 15 things. I set the intentions for how I want to feel, a couple things that do feel important, but I know that as long as I'm, doing my practices, taking good care of myself and trusting what's meant to be will kind of come my way, and letting the unfolding happen in that manner too.
Mm-hmm. So I'm mindful of the time, and we're getting near the end of our time, but I think one thing I'm just appreciating in this moment is how similar our worldviews are on these topics. We're coming from a similar vantage point. We've both had certain levels of success with manifestation, and I guess I'm claiming magic because they sound so similar.
I think they are. Yeah.
And for our audience who's listening, who hasn't experienced success with manifestation and magic, who, perhaps even more challenging, like perhaps they've achieved like strong experiences of perceived failures.
Yeah.
I'm curious, and I'm listening for my own, what I would add, but like, where would you encourage those who've perhaps had more negative experiences than positive to begin in reinventing their relationship or their felt sense of it?
One, I completely understand. I mean, I had an entire decade in my 30s of miserable dating. I was getting dumped left and right, and just dating patterns of men that were not serving me. And I was in an unfulfilling corporate career and didn't see a way out. I had a ton of privilege and a ton of good times and lots of love in my life. But I felt the sting of bitterness a lot in my life. And so I completely understand that. And so for me, what has been most helpful for me in shifting, and I think it'll be different for everybody, was simply deciding I was going to invite more play and a little bit of lightness back into my life. I was taking everything so seriously, and I was making my relationship status mean I was a failure. I was struggling in my work, and that meant I was a failure. And I know we talked about our astrological signs. You're a Taurus and I'm a Capricorn, and Capricorns can be like very serious and like very intense. And I have a Scorpio moon, which is like a whole nother level of intensity. And I needed a little more lightness. And so the way that I found my way into lightness that then did help with manifestation was taking my doing inner child work and doing what I call inner child play dates. So it's kind of like the artist date concept from The Artist's Way. And you went on like self-love dates. I started doing like inner child dates. So I would go take her to a matinee in the middle of the day when I could do that, or make craft mac and cheese and watch a Disney movie. And so I took the striving out of my desire to manifest, and I just actually focused on like what would feel good. But it had been so long since I'd focused on what had felt good that I had to go all the way back to childhood to be like, what did I like to do? So it turns out it was the simple stuff: long walks in nature, Saturday afternoons spent reading a romance or fantasy novel, comfort foods like mac and cheese, movies in the middle of the day, buying a new sheet of stickers at Target. So that's something I would offer, because, to almost circle it back to where we started, which is this concept of like our vulnerability being so tough for us to access. That started when we were kids. And when we can bring back a little tiny bit of joy and delight for our inner children, then things can kind of start to soften a little bit, and you get back in touch with your vulnerability, with your authenticity, and with your child self, who is still very much in there and very much, has dreams and desires too. So yeah, a little bit of lightness, a little bit of inner child play, and just allowing yourself to have a little more sparkle. Take away the striving, the self-flagellation where you can. It's hard. It took me like 10 years to do that. So I'm with you all. But little by little, like where can you find tiny amounts of joy and play and things that feel good to you?
I adore that. I hear like a healthy dose of not taking yourself so seriously. And I love like really disconnecting from the striving part of you to engage with the, your essential self. I was thinking, and it also doesn't escape me that you and I both had some of our first powerful experiences of manifestation in the romantic arena, which I think is probably not coincidental, because I think when you allow yourselves to open your heart to another partner, it allows you to open your heart in so many other areas of manifestation. For me, like, you mentioned the self-flagellation wound. For me, it was the self-abandonment wound. I had such a loud case of putting others' needs and priorities and preferences above my own, that for me, a morning ritual, a morning routine was such a powerful practice for me in reconnecting with my needs and being able to answer the question, like, what do I need in this moment? It was probably like the most important practice for me in dropping the caretaking and self-abandonment wounds and being able to connect with myself on a somatic level, on an emotional level, in order to show up as a whole self in relationship with, the world.
Yeah. And that's why self-care and self-discovery is so important. You can't manifest if you don't know what you don't want, and if you're a recovering people pleaser, a control freak, like I certainly am, my awareness was around what everybody else around me needed and wanted. And I was very controlling and being like, I will give it to them so they like me. And when, I started having a morning ritual too. I delved into the morning pages in the artist's way in my mid to late 30s. And that was a real turning point for me. And that's where I started to discover what was on my heart to want. And I named it. I was vulnerable and stating it out loud, even if it was only to my journal, and things kind of began to unfold from there.
So beautiful. Love it. So for our listeners, like, do the work, right? Like, be willing to trust the universe, to trust your peers, your friends, your loved ones, your mentors, partners with your desires, preferences, dreams. Be willing to be vulnerable and open your heart. Catherine, This has been a magical conversation. Like, absolutely loved it. And in closing, I'll ask you what I ask all my guests, which is, what has supported you in becoming a prosperous empath?
Oh my God, so many things. But I think first and foremost, my biggest teacher in being a prosperous empath will always be nature. It is one of my priorities to go walking in nature. I'm blessed and privileged enough to have space in my day to spend at least 30 to 60 minutes walking in nature. And it reminds me of the inevitable cycles of life, and also that abundance is all around me. I walk past a neighbor's farm. They have 20 chickens and they hand out free eggs. And I walk past the honeysuckle bush and I see the birds and the rabbits and the wild turkeys, especially now in spring. I mean, it's a particularly abundant time. But it reminds me that abundance and prosperity is my birthright, and that I have a divine connection to nature. Empaths and the highly sensitive people, we are absolutely in tune with nature. So wherever you can allow nature to be your teacher, your reminder, your supporter, nature wants to nurture you, and hold your pain and give you blessings too. And so however, in whatever small way you can connect with nature. For some of us, it will be growing a miniature pot of rosemary in our apartment, because we don't have access to a park. For some of us, it may be hiking in the Rockies and everywhere in between. So for me, my path to being a prosperous empath is led by nature, for sure.
No one has shared that answer yet. I love that answer. I think that's one of the reasons I am so grateful for having moved back to New England, is because there's 4 like strong seasons.
Yes.
And I think, we were talking about being willing to give up control. And I think that physical reminder of the seasonality of life gives us so much modeling of trusting the seasonality and the ebbs and flows in business and the seasons of our own lives and the life cycles. So that's an awesome reminder. Catherine, thank you so much. This has been an absolute honor and pleasure.
A total delight on my side. I'm so glad we finally connected. And thank you so much for allowing me to be on your podcast and having this magical conversation today.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath Podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.